Look at her. She thinks she can trap him with her tears.
Enough.
This woman is under my protection.
Hope's heart was heavy. It felt like a stone in her chest, pulling her down with every step she took on the dusty path. The Harmattan wind was cool, but it carried no comfort. It only seemed to whisper worries into her ear. Back in their small, crumbling house on the edge of the village, her younger brother, Sam, was sick. His stomach hurt so much that he could barely stand, and his face was pale and tight with pain. Her mother, Mama Rose, sat on the edge of the thin mattress they all shared, her blind eyes staring at nothing. Tears tracked clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. "He needs medicine, Hope," she had whispered, her voice trembling. "We cannot let him suffer like this." Hope knew. Of course, she knew. The knowledge was another stone, adding to the weight inside her. But knowing was not the same as having. They had no money. Not a single naira was left in the small clay pot where they kept their savings. The last of it had gone to buy a small bag of gari 2 days ago, and that was almost finished. Hope had tried to sound cheerful. "Don't worry, Mama. I will find a way. God will provide." But the words felt hollow even to her own ears. She had already asked for credit at the village patent medicine store, but the owner had shaken his head. "No more, Hope," he had said, not unkindly. "You still owe me for the last time." Now she was walking toward the only other place she could think of, her uncle's house. Mr. Silas was her father's younger brother, but he was not a kind man. He was hard and greedy, and he had always looked down on them since Papa died. He lived in a bigger house made of concrete blocks, not mud like theirs, and he owned a small shop in the village market. He had money, but he never shared it. As she walked, she remembered what her friend Joy had told her just yesterday by the stream. Joy had been washing her family's clothes, her arms deep in soapy water. Her voice had dropped to a whisper. "Hope, be careful. I heard some men talking in the market. They said your uncle is looking for a buyer for your father's land." Hope had stopped, the water pot on her head suddenly feeling 10 times heavier. "Our land? But he cannot do that. Papa left it for us." Joy had shrugged, her eyes full of pity. "You know how Mr. Silas is. He says since your father is gone and your brother is just a boy, he is the head of the family. He says the land is his to manage." To sell, Joy had meant. The thought made a cold fear spread through Hope's stomach. That small piece of land was all they had left of their father. It was where they grew the cassava and yams that kept them from starving completely. If Mr. Silas sold it, they would not only be poor and sick, they would be homeless, with nowhere to go. The fear made her walk faster. She had to talk to him. She had to beg him. Maybe, just this once, he would show some kindness. Maybe he would lend her the money for Sam's medicine and promise not to sell their land. It was a small hope, a tiny flicker of light in a great darkness, but it was all she had. The path curved and she could see his house ahead. It had a zinc roof that shone in the morning sun, unlike the rusty, patched-up roof of her own home. A new motorcycle was parked outside. He was getting richer while they were getting poorer. The unfairness of it all made her feel angry, but she pushed the feeling down. Anger would not help Sam. Only money would. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She smoothed down her worn wrapper and wiped the dust from her face with the back of her hand. She had to look strong, not like a desperate beggar, even though that was exactly what she felt like. As she approached the gate, a fancy-looking car she had never seen before suddenly sputtered to a stop right in front of her. The driver, a man in a neat uniform, got out and opened the hood, a worried look on his face. Hope paused, her own troubles forgotten for a moment. It was not every day a car like that came to their small village. It was long and sleek, the color of rich cream, and it looked like it belonged in the big city of Ibadan, not on their dusty, unpaved road. A man got out of the back seat. He was tall and wore clothes that looked impossibly expensive. His agbada was made of a fabric that shimmered, and the beads around his neck were heavy and colorful. He was handsome, with a kind face that looked out of place with all that wealth. He looked around, a little lost, and then his eyes met Hope's. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The dust, the heat, the weight in her chest. It all faded away. There was only the quiet surprise in his eyes and the sudden strange flutter in her own heart. She had no idea that this man, this prince from another world, was about to change her life forever. All she knew was that she had come to beg for a little money, and instead she had found something she never even knew she was looking for. The weight on her heart did not disappear, but for the first time in a very long time, it felt a little bit lighter. The path ahead was still uncertain, but a new, unexpected track had just appeared. Prince David sighed and leaned his head back against the soft leather of the car seat. The air inside the vehicle was cool, a welcome relief from the thick, humid air of the state capital. He had just spent 3 hours at a tiresome government function, smiling and shaking hands until his face ached. All he wanted now was the peace and quiet of the palace, a cool drink, and perhaps an hour alone with a good book. "Turn up the music, David, darling," a voice beside him said, far too loud. "This silence is so boring." David opened his eyes and looked at Clara. She was beautiful, he had to admit. Today she wore a bright red dress that was probably too revealing for a state event, and a wide-brimmed hat that kept bumping against the car's ceiling. Her red hair, which was not its natural color, was a wild cascade of curls around her face. She had just returned from a 2-year master's program in America, and she made sure no one forgot it. "It's not boring, Clara," he said patiently. "It's peaceful." "Peaceful is another word for boring," she declared, pulling a small, shiny flask from her handbag. She unscrewed the cap and took a sip. The sharp smell of vodka filled the car. David frowned. "Is that really necessary? It's barely past noon." Clara laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on his nerves. "Oh, darling, don't be such a local champion. This is how we do it in the States. A little drink to liven things up." He glanced at his driver, Ben, in the front seat. Ben's eyes met his for a second in the rearview mirror. The driver's face was like stone, but David could see the disapproval in the set of his shoulders. Ben had served the royal family for 20 years. He was loyal, quiet, and deeply traditional. He saw Clara not as a future queen, but as a problem. David couldn't help but agree. His engagement to Clara was not his choice. It was a deal, a political alliance cooked up by his father, King George, and Clara's father, the powerful Governor Thompson. The marriage was meant to join two of the most influential families in the region, securing power and wealth for generations to come. It had nothing to do with love. When Clara had left for America 2 years ago, David had been relieved. He had hoped the time and distance would change things. Maybe she would find someone else. Maybe he would. But she had returned last week, louder and more American than ever, and now the wedding plans were moving forward. He felt like a pawn in a game he had no interest in playing. "You've been so quiet since I got back, Tony," Clara pouted, calling him by the nickname he disliked. "Aren't you happy to see me?" She leaned closer, her perfume overwhelmingly sweet. "Of course I am," he lied, shifting away slightly. "I'm just tired. It was a long morning." "Well, let's make it an exciting afternoon," she giggled, taking another sip from her flask. She tried to offer it to him, but he shook his head. He looked out the window, watching the neat paved roads of the city give way to the bumpy, reddish-brown dirt tracks of the countryside. They were getting closer to the palace, which was located in a large private estate just outside a cluster of small villages. He loved this part of the journey. The air always seemed cleaner here, filled with the scent of earth and growing things. He saw women walking along the road with baskets on their heads and farmers working in fields of tall green maize. This was the real Nigeria, his Nigeria. It felt a world away from the artificial life Clara represented. He missed the simplicity of it. He sometimes wished he hadn't been born a prince. He longed for a life where his choices were his own, where he could fall in love with someone for who they was, not for what their family could offer his. Suddenly the smooth hum of the engine faltered. The car coughed once, then twice, and began to slow down. "What's happening?" Clara asked, annoyed. Ben guided the car to the side of the road. "I'm not sure, my prince. It seems to be an engine problem." He turned the key, but the engine only made a sad, clicking sound. David looked out the window. They were on a lonely stretch of road, surrounded by farmland. In the distance, he could see the thatched roofs of a small village. There were no other cars in sight. "Wonderful," Clara muttered, fanning herself with her hand. Just wonderful, stranded in the middle of nowhere. David felt a strange mix of annoyance and something else, a flicker of unexpected freedom. For now at least, he was free from the palace, free from his duties, and stuck. He got out of the car, breathing in the dusty, sun-warmed air. It was then that he saw her. A young woman was walking towards them down the path, a clay pot balanced perfectly on her head. She moved with a natural grace that made him stop and stare. She was not beautiful in the way Clara was, with her bright makeup and fancy clothes. This girl's beauty was quiet and real, like the land around them. He didn't know it yet, but the engine of his car was not the only thing that had broken down. In that moment, on that dusty road, the carefully constructed engine of his life had also begun to sputter and fail, making way for something entirely new and unexpected. Hope walked with her head down, her mind a whirlwind of worries. What if Mr. Silas had already sold the land? What if he refused to give her money for Sam? The questions chased each other around in her head, so loud that she barely noticed the fancy car stopped on the side of the road. Suddenly, the car's engine gave a loud cough and lurched forward. Hope jumped back with a small cry, her heart leaping into her throat. The heavy clay pot on her head wobbled, and she reached up just in time to steady it. "I am so sorry," a voice called out. "Are you all right?" Hope looked up, her breath catching. The man who had gotten out of the car was walking toward her. It was the handsome, richly dressed man she had noticed just moments before. He looked genuinely concerned, his brow furrowed. "I'm fine," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. She felt shy and small in her faded wrapper, her feet dusty from the road. She was suddenly very aware of how poor she must look to him. "The car seems to have a mind of its own," he said with a small, apologetic smile. "My name is David." He didn't say Prince David. He just said his name, as if he were any other person. That small act of humility made Hope feel a little more at ease. "I am Hope," she replied softly. The driver Ben came over. "My prince, the engine is dead. I think we will need a mechanic." David looked around at the empty road. "Is there one nearby?" he asked Hope. She nodded. "Yes, in the next village. It is not far to walk. Mr. Aid's workshop is just past the market square. Everyone knows him." David smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Thank you, Hope. You've saved us." He then turned to his driver. "Ben, could you please walk to the village and find Mr. Aid? I will wait here with the car." Ben nodded respectfully and set off down the road. An awkward silence fell between Hope and the prince. She didn't know what to say to someone like him. She shifted her weight, the pot on her head feeling heavy again. "You carry that so easily," David said, breaking the silence. "It must be heavy." "I am used to it," Hope said simply. "I fetch water from the stream every day." He looked at her with a curious expression. "You live in the village nearby?" "Yes, just at the edge of it." He seemed to want to ask more, but he didn't. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his agbada and pulled out a thick roll of naira notes. He peeled off several large bills and held them out to her. "Please," he said, "for your trouble and for the fright I gave you." Hope stared at the money. It was more than she had seen in months. It was enough to buy medicine for Sam and food for a whole week, maybe even more. But her mother had always taught her not to accept gifts from strangers. "No, thank you," she said, shaking her head. "It is not necessary. I am glad I could help." "I insist," David said, his voice gentle but firm. "Please take it. It would make me feel better." She hesitated, her need warring with her pride. She thought of Sam's pained face and her mother's tears. She slowly reached out and took the money, her fingers brushing against his. A strange warmth shot up her arm. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes cast down. "Thank you very much." She wanted to run away then, to escape his kind eyes and the confusing feelings he was stirring in her. But she made herself stand still, her dignity her only shield. Just then, Ben returned, followed by a man in greasy overalls who must be Mr. Aid, the mechanic. "The prince is very lucky," Mr. Aid said, wiping his hands on a rag. "My own truck is just down the road. I can give you a tow back to my workshop." David nodded his thanks to the mechanic and then turned back to Hope. Thank you again, Hope. I hope we meet again. His words were simple, but they held a promise that made her heart beat a little faster. She simply nodded, unable to speak. She watched as they hooked the cream-colored car to the mechanic's old truck. David got back into the passenger seat, and as the truck pulled away, he looked back at her one last time. Their eyes met across the dusty distance, and Hope felt that strange flutter in her heart again. She stood there for a long moment after the car was out of sight, clutching the money in her hand. It felt warm, as if it held some of the prince's own kindness. She had forgotten all about confronting her uncle. All she could think about was the man with the gentle smile and the sad eyes. Finally, she turned and started walking back the way she came, her steps much lighter than before. She would go to the medicine store first, then the market. Tonight, her family would eat well. As she hurried home, a small, hopeful thought entered her mind. Maybe, just maybe, God really had provided. In the car, David was also lost in thought. The image of the village girl, with her quiet strength and shy smile, was burned into his mind. Ben, he said suddenly, his voice firm, find out who she is. I want to know everything about her. The small room was filled with the delicious smell of frying plantain and stew. For the first time in many weeks, there was more than enough food. Hope had bought a whole bag of rice, yams, and even a small piece of fish. The money from the kind stranger felt like a miracle. Sam was sitting up in bed, a small bowl of rice in his lap. The medicine Hope had bought seemed to be working. The tight lines of pain on his face had softened, and he was eating with a good appetite. This is the best stew you have ever made, Hope, he said, his mouth full. Hope smiled, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. It is the same stew I always make. Maybe you are just hungry. But Mama Rose, sitting in her usual corner, was not smiling. Her blind eyes were turned towards Hope, her face a mask of worry. Hope, my daughter, she said, her voice low, where did this money come from? Hope's smile faded. She knew her mother would ask. Mama Rose had always been proud and had taught her children never to take what wasn't theirs. Mama, I told you, a man's car broke down on the road. I helped him, and he was grateful. What kind of man gives so much money for just pointing the way to a mechanic? Mama Rose asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Did he ask for anything in return? Hope felt a blush creep up her neck. No, Mama, he was not like that. He was a gentleman, he was kind. She described the man, his expensive clothes, and the fancy car. I think he is a very rich man from the city. The money was probably nothing to him. Mama Rose was silent for a long time, her hands twisting in her lap. Finally she sighed. The world is a dangerous place for a young woman, Hope. Rich men can be the most dangerous of all. He was not dangerous, Hope insisted, her voice soft but sure. She remembered the look in his eyes, the gentle way he had spoken to her. She could not believe a man like that would mean her any harm. Before her mother could say more, there was a knock at their door. It was a soft, hesitant knock, not the loud, demanding bang of their landlord or the angry pounding of Mr. Silas. Hope's heart skipped a beat. She opened the door a crack and peered out. Standing there was the driver from the fancy car. He was holding a large basket filled with fruits and provisions. Good afternoon, he said politely. My name is Ben. My master, Prince David, sent me. He was worried about you and your family. Prince David. So he was a prince after all. Hope's mind reeled. A prince had spoken to her, had given her money, and now had sent his driver with gifts. It felt like something out of a storybook. She let Ben in, and he placed the heavy basket on their small table. Mama Rose, hearing the strange voice, grew tense again. Who is it, Hope? It is the driver of the man I told you about, Mama, Hope explained, her voice filled with awe. His master is a prince. Ben bowed his head respectfully to Mama Rose. The prince sends his greetings. He asked me to make sure your family has everything you need. The kindness of the gesture was overwhelming. Tears pricked at Hope's eyes. She thanked Ben, who simply nodded, and said he would be back to check on them again. After he left, the small room was filled with a sense of wonder. They looked at the basket, filled with oranges, mangoes, tins of milk, and bags of sugar. It was a treasure trove. A prince, Mama Rose whispered, her hand reaching out to touch a smooth, ripe mango. Why would a prince care about a poor family like ours? Hope did not have an answer. She only knew that the prince's kindness felt like a ray of sunshine breaking through the dark clouds that had hung over their lives for so long. That night, for the first time in a very long time, Hope went to sleep with a heart full of something other than worry. She dreamt of a kind smile and gentle eyes, and of a future that might hold more than just struggle and sorrow. The weight of the world was still there, but now, it seemed, she might not have to carry it all by herself. A prince knew her name, and for some reason he had chosen to be kind. It was a small thing, perhaps, but to Hope it felt like everything. The dining hall of the royal palace was a study in quiet elegance. The long mahogany table gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier. The plates were fine china, and the cutlery was heavy silver. Yet the atmosphere was as stiff and cold as the polished silverware. King George sat at the head of the table, his face a stern mask. He had been trying for days to talk to his son about the wedding arrangements, but David had been evasive. Tonight, he had insisted on a formal family dinner with Governor Thompson and Clara as their guests to force the issue. He wanted to see his son and future daughter-in-law together, acting like the power couple they were meant to be. But the evening was not going as planned. Prince David was quiet and withdrawn, barely touching his food. Clara, on the other hand, was trying too hard. She talked loudly about her time in America, dropping names of places and people no one at the table had ever heard of. In New York, she announced, we would never eat a heavy meal like this for dinner. It's all about light salads and maybe a glass of champagne. Queen Eleanor, a woman of quiet dignity, gave a tight, polite smile. Here in Nigeria, we enjoy our food, my dear. It is a sign of hospitality. Of course, Clara said quickly, realizing her mistake. But a few minutes later, she made another. She pulled out a long, thin cigarette from her purse and lit it, right there at the dining table. A shocked silence fell. King George's eyes narrowed. Smoking was something done in private, not at the royal dinner table in front of elders. It was a sign of deep disrespect. David finally spoke, his voice low and sharp. Clara, put that out. Clara looked surprised. What? It's just a cigarette, Tony. It is disrespectful, David said, his eyes flashing with anger. We are not in a nightclub in Miami. We are in my father's house. Clara's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. She stubbed out the cigarette in her side plate, a small defiant gesture. King George decided it was time to take control. David, we need to set a date for the wedding. Your father-in-law and I are in agreement that it should be soon. A grand wedding will strengthen the bonds between our families and the state. David set down his fork. Father, I am not ready to discuss the wedding. Not ready? The king boomed. You have been engaged for 2 years. What is there to be ready for? Perhaps, David said, his voice dangerously quiet, I have realized that a marriage should be about more than politics and alliances. He glanced at Clara, who was glaring at him. Perhaps it should be about character and respect. The jab was not subtle. Clara gasped. Governor Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What is this nonsense you are speaking? King George demanded. Are you questioning my judgment? I am questioning the idea of marrying someone I do not love or respect, David said boldly. His eyes then took on a faraway look. I met a woman in the village the other day, a real woman, someone with grace and dignity, someone who understands our traditions. Clara's eyes widened with suspicion. A village woman? What were you doing with a village woman? My car broke down, David said dismissively, but the damage was done. The seed of jealousy had been planted in Clara's mind, and the seed of rebellion had been planted in the king's. Later that evening, after their guests had left in a cloud of tension, King George summoned David to his private study. I will not have it, the king roared, pacing the thick Persian rug. I will not have my son, the heir to this throne, chasing after some nameless, penniless girl from the village. You will marry Clara, and you will do it soon. This alliance is too important to be ruined by your foolish sentiment. It is not foolish to want a wife I can be proud of, David retorted. You will be proud of the power this marriage brings, his father shouted. End this foolishness now. I forbid you from seeing that girl again. Do you understand me? David stared at his father, his jaw tight. He did not say yes, but he did not say no either. He simply turned and walked out of the study, leaving the king fuming. Meanwhile, in her own lavish home, Clara was also fuming. A village girl. The insult was unbearable. Who was this girl who had captured David's attention? She had to find out. She picked up her phone and made a call. "I need you to find someone for me," she said to the voice on the other end. "He's a private investigator, the best one. I want you to have him follow Prince David. I want to know everywhere he goes and everyone he sees, especially if he goes back to that village." She hung up the phone, her eyes cold and hard. If some poor, insignificant girl thought she could steal her prince, she was about to learn a very painful lesson. Clara was not a woman who lost, and she would do whatever it took to win. A few days later, Prince David found a reason to escape the palace. He told his father he was going to inspect some of the community development projects the kingdom was funding in the surrounding villages. It was a plausible excuse, one that even the king could not object to. But his real destination was the small, dusty village where he had met Hope. He had Ben drive him, but he instructed his official guards to remain at the palace. He trusted Ben, who understood the prince's heart better than anyone. Ben had already found out where Hope lived, and a little about her family's struggles. He knew the prince was not just curious, he was genuinely concerned. As they drove down the familiar dirt road, David felt his heart beat a little faster. He was nervous, like a schoolboy going to see his first crush. What if she didn't want to see him? What if her mother had warned her away from him? Ben parked the car under the shade of a large mango tree at the edge of the village. "Her family's farm is just over that rise, my prince," he said quietly. "Wait here, Ben," David said, getting out of the car. He had changed out of his royal robes and into a simple but elegant traditional outfit, hoping to look less intimidating. He walked over the small hill and saw it, a small patch of land where cassava plants grew in neat rows. And there she was. Hope was bent over, weeding the rows with a small hoe, her movements rhythmic and graceful. The sun was hot, and beads of sweat shone on her brow, but she worked with a quiet determination that he found beautiful. He stood for a moment, just watching her. She was wearing a simple blouse and wrapper, her hair tied back neatly. She looked up as if she sensed his presence, and her eyes widened in surprise when she saw him. "Your Highness," she said, quickly dropping into a respectful curtsy. "Please, just David," he said, walking closer. "I told you there is no need for formalities." She straightened up, looking shy and uncertain. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the area," he said, which was only partly a lie. "I wanted to see if you and your family were all right. My driver told me your brother was unwell." Hope's face softened with gratitude. "He is much better. Thank you. The medicine you helped us buy, it worked very well. And thank you for the food you sent. We are very grateful." "It was nothing," he said. He looked at the small, tidy farm. "You do all this work by yourself?" "My brother helps when he is strong enough," she explained. "And my mother, she used to help before—" Her voice trailed off. "Before what?" David asked gently. "Before she lost her sight," Hope said quietly. "It happened a few years ago. The doctors at the local clinic said there was nothing they could do." David's heart ached for her. He could see the weight of her family's burdens resting on her young shoulders, yet she bore it with such grace. He saw the strength in her, the resilience that had been forged by hardship. It was a quality he rarely saw in the wealthy, pampered women of his circle, like Clara. They talked for a long time, standing there under the hot Nigerian sun. She told him about her love for the land, about her dreams of one day sending her brother to a good school. He listened, captivated by the simple honesty of her words. He felt a connection to her that was deeper and more real than anything he had ever felt with Clara. This was not about politics or power. This was about two people, two souls, finding each other in the most unexpected of places. "I want to help you, Hope," he said, his voice earnest. "Your mother should see a specialist in Lagos. I can arrange it. And your brother, he deserves the best medical care." Hope's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of hope, not sorrow. I don't know what to say. You are too kind." "It is the least I can do," he said. He wanted to reach out and wipe a tear from her cheek, but he stopped himself. It was too soon. He knew in that moment that his feelings for her were more than just a passing fancy. He was falling in love with this poor, strong, beautiful village girl. And he knew with a sinking feeling that his father would never approve. But as he looked at Hope, he felt a new resolve harden within him. He would not let his father's ambitions or Clara's jealousy stand in the way of this. He would find a way to be with her. As he walked back to the car, his heart was full. He felt as if he had finally found something true and precious. He didn't notice the man hiding in the bushes a short distance away, a camera with a long lens pointed directly at him. The man took several pictures of the prince and the village girl, their faces close together, their connection obvious even from a distance. Then he slipped away, his mission accomplished, unaware of the storm his pictures were about to unleash. The glossy photographs were spread across Clara's glass-topped coffee table like a declaration of war. Each one was a sharp, painful stab to her pride. There was David, her prince, her fiancé, smiling at that nobody. That girl in the faded wrapper with dirt under her fingernails. The intimacy in their posture, the gentle look on David's face, it was all there, in vivid color. Clara's hands trembled as she picked up a photo. Her knuckles were white. So this is his community project, she hissed to herself. Her private investigator had done his job well. He had not only followed David, but had also dug up information on the girl. Her name was Hope. She was an orphan, living in poverty with a blind mother and a sick brother. The final insult was the report on the family's wicked uncle, a man named Silas, who was trying to cheat them out of their land. A slow, cold fury burned in Clara's chest. This wasn't just about David's wandering eye. This was an attack on her status, her future, her very identity. She was to be the next queen, not some village girl who smelled of yams and poverty. The idea was absurd, insulting. She would not allow it. She had tried playing the part of the sophisticated modern woman, but it was clear that David was not impressed. He wanted someone traditional, someone with dignity. Fine. If she couldn't win him with charm, she would win by eliminating the competition. She needed to get rid of Hope, but it had to be done carefully. No one could trace it back to her. Her eyes fell on the investigator's notes about Mr. Silas. A cruel, cunning idea began to form in her mind. This greedy, heartless uncle was the perfect tool. He already hated the family. He wanted their land. He would be easy to manipulate. She found his phone number in the report and dialed it. A rough voice answered on the other end. "Who is this?" "My name is not important," Clara said, her voice smooth as silk. "But I believe we have a common interest. I understand you are having some trouble with your late brother's family." There was a suspicious silence on the other end. "What is it to you?" "Let's just say I want them gone," Clara said coldly. "I want them out of the village, out of the state, and out of Prince David's life, permanently." She heard a sharp intake of breath. "The prince?" "Yes," Clara confirmed. "That little tramp has caught his eye, and I will not stand for it. I want you to make their lives so miserable that they have no choice but to run away and never come back. I want them to disappear." "That will cost you," Mr. Silas said, his voice now filled with greedy excitement. "I am prepared to pay handsomely," Clara replied. She named a sum of money that was more than Mr. Silas would see in 10 years of running his small market shop. It was a fortune to him. To her, it was a small price to pay for securing her future. "Consider it done," Mr. Silas said eagerly. "They will be gone before the week is out. They won't know what hit them." "Good," Clara said, a thin, cruel smile playing on her lips. "And Mr. Silas, make sure no one ever finds out about this conversation. If this comes back to me, I will make sure you disappear as well." She hung up the phone and looked back at the photographs on her table. She picked them up one by one and tore them into tiny pieces. She felt a sense of power, of control. David thought he could defy her, defy his father, for this poor girl. He was a fool. She would show him. She would show them all. She would crush this little Hope and grind her into the same dirt she came from. And when it was all over, David would come back to her. He would have no other choice. She sat back on her plush sofa, the torn pieces of the photos scattered around her like confetti, and for the first time since she had returned to Nigeria, she smiled a true, satisfied smile. The game was on, and she had just made her first move. The air in the small room was thick with the smell of herbal balm. Hope gently rubbed the ointment onto her brother's chest. Sam had been feeling better for a few days, but tonight a fever had returned, and his breathing was shallow. Mama Rose sat nearby, her hands clasped tightly, her blind eyes wide with worry as she listened to every cough and groan. "He needs a real doctor, Hope," she murmured for the 10th time. "The medicine from the village store is not enough." "I know, Mama," Hope said, her voice strained. "The prince, he said he would help. He said he would send for a doctor from the city." It had been almost a week since Prince David's visit to their farm. He had sent his driver, Ben, back twice with more food and a little money, but they had not seen the prince himself. A small seed of doubt had begun to sprout in Hope's heart. Had he forgotten his promise? Was it all just the careless words of a rich man feeling a moment of pity? She pushed the thought away. She had to believe in his kindness. It was the only hope she had. Outside, the night was dark and still. The usual chorus of crickets and frogs was a comforting sound. Suddenly, a loud bang on their flimsy wooden door shattered the peace. "Who is it?" Hope called out, her heart jumping with fear. The door burst open, and a group of men stormed in. In the dim light of their single kerosene lamp, Hope recognized the cruel face of her uncle, Mr. Silas. He was flanked by two large, rough-looking men she had seen loitering around the village palm wine bar. "What do you want?" Hope cried, jumping to her feet and standing protectively in front of her mother and brother. "We've come to collect what is ours," Mr. Silas sneered, his eyes darting around the small room. "This house, this land, it all belongs to me now. You have overstayed your welcome." "This is our home," Hope said, her voice shaking but defiant. "Our father left it to us," Mr. Silas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your father is dead, and your brother is a weakling. I am the man of this family now, and I say you leave. Tonight." One of the thugs grabbed Sam and dragged him from the bed. Sam cried out in pain as the man threw him to the floor. "Stop it, he is sick," Hope screamed, rushing forward, but the other thug caught her, his rough hands bruising her arms. "We're just getting started," he growled. What happened next was a nightmare of violence and terror. The men overturned their small table, scattering the last of their food onto the dirt floor. They smashed their clay pots. While one man held Hope back, Mr. Silas and the other began to beat Sam, kicking him as he lay curled on the ground. Mama Rose, hearing her son's cries of pain, began to scream. "Leave him alone. Please, leave my son alone." She stumbled forward, her blind hands reaching out into the darkness. Mr. Silas turned to her, his face a mask of pure evil. "You old witch," he spat. "This is all your fault. If you had just died with your husband, none of this would be happening." He grabbed the frail old woman and began to drag her towards the door. "No, Mama!" Hope shrieked, struggling against the man who held her. "Don't take her, please." But her pleas were useless. They dragged her mother out into the dark night. Then, to Hope's horror, one of the men took the kerosene lamp and threw it onto the dry, thatched roof of their small house. The roof caught fire instantly. Flames shot up into the night sky, casting a terrifying orange glow over the scene. The heat was intense, and the smell of smoke filled the air. The men laughed as they backed away from the burning house, leaving Hope and her brother inside. "This should teach you to mess with the prince," one of them shouted, and then they were gone, their cruel laughter echoing in the night. Hope scrambled to Sam's side. He was barely conscious, his body bruised and broken. The fire was spreading quickly, eating away at the dry mud walls of their home. Smoke filled her lungs, making her choke and gasp for air. With a strength born of desperation, she managed to drag her brother out of the burning house just as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and flames. They lay on the ground, coughing and weeping as they watched everything they owned turn to ash. Their home was gone. Her brother was badly hurt, and her mother, her blind, helpless mother, had been taken. A terrible cold despair washed over Hope. They had no one to turn to. Then a single thought pierced through her grief and terror. The prince, David, he had promised to help. He was her only hope. She didn't know if he was in the palace or if he would even see her, but she had to try. Leaving Sam in the care of a neighbor who had come running at the sight of the fire, Hope began to run. She ran down the dark, dusty path, her bare feet pounding against the hard earth. She ran towards the distant lights of the palace, tears streaming down her face, her heart crying out one name over and over again: David. The grand gates of the royal palace loomed before Hope like an iron wall. They were tall and imposing, decorated with the golden crest of the kingdom. 2 guards in crisp uniforms stood on either side, their faces stern and impassive. Hope ran the last few steps, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her lungs burning. "Please," she pleaded, clutching the iron bars. "I must see the prince. It is an emergency." One of the guards looked her up and down, his eyes taking in her torn, smoke-stained wrapper and her bare, dusty feet. A look of disdain crossed his face. "The prince is not available," he said, his voice cold and dismissive. "Go away." "But you don't understand," Hope cried, her voice cracking with desperation. "My mother has been taken. My house, it's been burned. He said he would help me." The second guard laughed, a short, ugly bark. "The prince, help you? Why would the prince help a village rat like you? He is busy. He is with his fiancée, the governor's daughter. He has no time for beggars." His fiancée. The words hit Hope like a physical blow. Of course, how could she have been so foolish? A prince and a poor village girl. It was a children's story, not real life. He had been toying with her, amusing himself with her poverty. The kindness, the promises, it had all been a lie. The last flicker of hope in her heart died, leaving behind a cold, dark emptiness. The guard's laughter followed her as she stumbled away from the gate, her body numb with shock and grief. She had nowhere to go. Her home was a pile of smouldering ash. Her brother was injured. Her mother was gone, and the one person she had believed in, the one person who had given her a reason to hope, had abandoned her. She wandered aimlessly, her feet carrying her away from the village and into the dark woods that bordered the palace estate. The night was cool, but she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the chill of absolute despair. The world had taken everything from her. Her father, her siblings, her mother's sight, and now her home and the last of her family. What was the point of going on? What was left to live for? The pain in her heart was a physical ache, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. She looked up at the tall trees, their branches like dark, skeletal fingers against the moonlit sky. Her eyes fell upon a thick rope hanging from a low branch, left behind by some farmers who had been clearing the land. An idea, dark and final, took root in her mind. An end to the pain, the struggle, the constant, relentless suffering. It seemed like the only way out, the only path to peace. Her movements were slow and mechanical, as if she were watching someone else. She picked up the end of the rope and, with a numb determination, began to tie a loop. Her fingers fumbled with the knot, but she kept trying until it was secure. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she climbed the rough bark of the tree, perching on the thick branch where the rope was tied. The world below looked distant and unreal. The sounds of the night, the chirping crickets, the rustling leaves, seemed to come from a faraway place. She took one last look at the moon, a pale, lonely circle in the dark sky. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "Mama," she whispered. "Papa, I am coming." She slipped the rough noose over her head and around her neck. She closed her eyes, took a shaky breath, and prepared to let go. The weight of the world had become too much to bear. She was ready to let it all fall away. In the suffocating darkness of her despair, suicide felt like the only possible escape. Prince David felt a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. The forced dinner with Clara at a fancy Ibadan restaurant had been a miserable affair. She had chattered endlessly about fashion and parties, while he had stared out the window, his thoughts miles away in a small dusty village. "You haven't heard a word I've said, have you?" Clara had accused, her voice sharp. "I'm sorry," he had mumbled. "I have a lot on my mind." Now, as Ben drove them back towards the palace, the feeling of dread grew stronger. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. It was an irrational feeling, but it was so powerful he couldn't ignore it. "Ben," he said suddenly, "turn here." Ben glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "But my prince, this is not the way to the palace." "I know," David said, his voice sharp. "It's a shortcut through the woods. Just do it." Clara sighed dramatically from the back seat. "Honestly, Tony, can't we just go home? I'm tired of all this driving around in the dark." David ignored her. "Hurry, Ben." Ben, sensing the urgency in the prince's voice, turned the car onto a narrow, bumpy track that led into the forest. The headlights cut a bright path through the darkness, illuminating the gnarled trunks of ancient trees. David leaned forward, his eyes scanning the woods on either side of the road. He didn't know what he was looking for, but his heart was pounding. And then he saw it. A flash of color in the branches of a large Iroko tree just off the path. It was the same striped pattern as the wrapper Hope had been wearing when he first met her. "Stop the car," he yelled, his voice raw with alarm. Before the car had even come to a complete stop, he threw open the door and scrambled out. He ran towards the tree, his heart hammering against his ribs. The scene that met his eyes would be burned into his memory forever. It was Hope. She was standing on a thick branch, a rope tied around her neck. Her eyes were closed, her face pale and streaked with tears in the harsh glare of the car's headlights. "No!" The word was torn from his throat. He didn't think. He just acted. He scrambled up the rough bark of the tree, his expensive clothes tearing, his hands scraping against the wood. He reached her just as she seemed to sway, her body about to fall. "Hope, don't!" he cried, grabbing her. Her eyes fluttered open, wide with shock and confusion. He saw the flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of fresh despair. He fumbled in his pocket for the small, ornate knife he always carried. With trembling hands, he sawed at the thick rope until it frayed and snapped. He held her tight, his arms wrapped around her as he carefully helped her down from the branch. Her body was limp in his arms, her sobs shaking her small frame. He sank to the ground with her, holding her close, rocking her like a child. "It's okay," he whispered, his own voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now. I've got you." He didn't know how long they sat there, on the cold, damp earth, surrounded by the darkness of the forest. He just held her, letting her cry out all the pain and terror. He felt a rage building inside him, a cold, hard anger at whoever had driven her to this. Clara had gotten out of the car and was standing by the road, her arms crossed, a look of annoyance on her face. "What is all this drama about?" she called out. "Can we please go?" David looked at her, and the look in his eyes made her take a step back. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He turned his attention back to Hope, who had finally stopped sobbing. She was barely conscious, her head resting against his chest. "They took her," she whispered, her voice a faint, broken sound. "They took my mother, and they burned our house." The words hit David like a punch to the gut. It was worse than he could have imagined. He held her tighter, a fierce, protective love surging through him. "Who?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "Who did this to you?" Hope shook her head weakly, unable to speak. It didn't matter. David already knew. He knew who was behind this. The pieces clicked together in his mind. His father's anger, Clara's jealousy, the talk of a greedy uncle. It all led back to one source. He gently lifted Hope into his arms. She was surprisingly light. He carried her back to the car, ignoring Clara's protests. "Take her," he ordered Ben, carefully placing Hope in the back seat. "Take her to the Royal Clinic in Ibadan. Tell Dr. Adebayo I am coming. And find her brother. He is with a neighbor. Take him there too. Do not let anyone from the palace know." "Yes, my prince," Ben said, his face grim. "And you," David said, turning to Clara, his voice dangerously calm. "You will come with me." He practically threw her into the front seat and got behind the wheel himself. He turned the car around with a screech of tires and sped back towards the palace, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The night was far from over. There were people who were going to pay for what they had done. He would make sure of it. The Royal Clinic was a small private hospital in a quiet part of Ibadan, funded by the kingdom for the exclusive use of the royal family and their staff. It was the perfect place to keep Hope and Sam safe and hidden. Dr. Adebayo, an old and trusted friend of the family, assured David that they would receive the best possible care. Sam's injuries were serious but not life-threatening, and Hope was being treated for shock and exhaustion. Leaving them in the doctor's capable hands, David set his plan in motion. He did not trust the official palace guards, who were ultimately loyal to his father. Instead, he called upon a small, elite team of men who were personally loyal to him, men he had served with during his time in the army. They were discreet, efficient, and utterly reliable. His instructions were simple and brutal. Find the men who attacked Hope's family. I want them found, and I want them to talk. Use any means necessary. It did not take long. Within hours, his men had located one of the thugs, a local troublemaker known for his cowardice, cowering in a palm wine bar in a neighboring village. They brought him to a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of the city. David stood before the terrified man, his face cold and hard. He was no longer the gentle prince Hope had met on the dusty road. He was a commander, and his anger was a palpable force in the room. I am only going to ask you once, David said, his voice a low growl. Who paid you to attack that family? The man, his face already bruised from his capture, trembled. I don't know what you're talking about. David nodded to one of his guards. The guard delivered a single sharp blow to the man's stomach. The thug doubled over, gasping for air. Let's try again, David said calmly. Who paid you? This time the story came tumbling out. The man confessed everything. He said it was Mr. Silas, the girl's uncle, who had hired them. He had promised them a share of the money he would get from selling the family's land. And who paid Silas? David pressed, his eyes like chips of ice. The thug hesitated. He said it was a woman, a rich woman from the city. He didn't say her name. Describe her, David commanded. The man's description was unmistakable. The red hair, the fancy clothes, the expensive car. It was Clara. The rage in David's heart burned hotter. She had not only tried to ruin Hope's life, she had used his own people, the people of his kingdom, to do her dirty work. Where is the blind woman? David asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Silas has her, the thug stammered. He's holding her in an old, abandoned shed near the river. He was waiting for the rich woman to pay him the rest of the money before getting rid of her. Getting rid of her. They had planned to murder a helpless, blind old woman. David felt sick to his stomach. He turned to his lead guard. Take 2 men and go to that shed. Get the woman out safely and bring Silas to me, alive. The guard nodded and left immediately. David looked back at the whimpering thug on the floor. As for you, he said, you will come with me to the palace. You are going to tell my father exactly what you just told me. He strode out of the warehouse, the thug being dragged behind him by the remaining guards. The drive to the palace was a blur of fury. He had been a fool. He had underestimated Clara's cruelty and his father's stubborn pride. He had tried to handle the situation with discretion, but discretion was no longer an option. He had let his father's politics and Clara's manipulations hurt the one person who had shown him true kindness and decency. He had failed to protect her, but he would not fail her again. When he arrived at the palace, he did not wait to be announced. He stormed past the startled guards and headed straight for his father's private study. He knew the king would be there, probably congratulating himself on having put his wayward son back in his place. He was about to show his father just how wrong he was. The time for quiet defiance was over. It was time for the king to face the ugly truth of the alliances he held so dear. It was time for a reckoning. The doors to the king's grand study burst open, making everyone inside jump. King George, Queen Eleanor, Governor Thompson, and Clara were seated in plush armchairs, sipping expensive brandy and discussing the upcoming wedding. The mood was self-congratulatory. They believed they had successfully managed Prince David's brief rebellion. Then David strode into the room. His face was a thundercloud of rage, and behind him, 2 of his guards dragged the bruised and terrified thug. "What is the meaning of this?" King George roared, rising to his feet. "Have you gone mad?" David ignored him. His eyes were locked on Clara, who had turned pale with shock and fear. "I believe you know this man," David said, his voice dripping with ice. He gestured to the thug cowering on the floor. "He has a very interesting story to tell. A story about a rich woman from the city who paid him and his friends to kidnap a blind old woman and burn her house to the ground." The air in the room grew thick with tension. Clara leapt to her feet. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen this man in my life." "Liar," David roared, taking a step towards her. The guards beside him tensed, ready to intervene. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you? You thought you could destroy an innocent family, and I would never find out. He turned his furious gaze on his father. And you, this is what your precious alliance has brought us. Attempted murder, kidnapping, all so you can join our family with this snake. Governor Thompson, Clara's father, looked horrified. My daughter would never do such a thing. This is an outrage. Oh, really? David sneered. He grabbed the thug by the collar and hauled him to his feet. Tell them everything, or I swear I will let my men finish what they started. The thug, sobbing with fear, recounted the entire sordid tale. He told them how Mr. Silas had hired them, how they had attacked the family, and how it was all paid for by a woman who matched Clara's description perfectly. When he was finished, a deathly silence filled the room. Clara's face had crumbled. The mask of arrogance was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. He's lying, she shrieked. That pig of an uncle is lying to save himself. It's all a plot to ruin me. But no one was listening. The truth was plain to see in her terrified eyes. King George stared at his son, then at Clara, and then at his old friend, Governor Thompson. The foundation of his carefully planned world was collapsing around him. He had been so focused on power and politics that he had been blind to the wickedness growing right under his own roof. He had pushed his son towards a monster. The shame was a heavy weight in his chest, followed by a wave of royal fury. He had been deceived and dishonored in his own palace. Guards, he bellowed, his voice thundering through the study. The official palace guards rushed in, their faces grim. Arrest her, the king commanded, pointing a trembling finger at Clara. And find this man, Silas. Find him and bring him to me. They will both answer for their crimes. Clara screamed as the guards took her by the arms. You can't do this to me. My father is the governor. David, tell them it's a mistake. But David just stared at her with cold contempt. The only mistake, he said quietly, was ever believing you were worthy of being a princess. As they dragged a hysterical Clara from the room, Governor Thompson sank back into his chair, his face pale and slack. His political ambitions had just gone up in flames, consumed by his own daughter's evil. King George looked at his son, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger, shame, and a dawning respect. He had seen David not as a foolish boy, but as a man, a prince who fought for justice even when it meant defying his own king. Father, David said, his voice now quiet and heavy with exhaustion, my men are on their way to rescue Hope's mother. I must go to them. The king simply nodded, unable to speak. The grand study, which had once been a symbol of his power, now felt like a prison of his own making. He had nearly sacrificed his son's happiness and the lives of an innocent family for a worthless alliance. The reckoning had come, and the price was his own pride. The abandoned shed by the river was dark and damp, smelling of mud and decay. Inside, Mama Rose was tied to a wooden post, her blind eyes wide with terror. She had been here for hours, listening to the cruel taunts of her nephew, Mr. Silas. He had told her that her children were dead, that their house was gone, and that she would be next. Soon, old woman, he had sneered, all of this land will be mine, and you will be food for the fishes. Suddenly, the shed door burst open. Before Silas could react, he was surrounded by Prince David's men. They moved with a swift, silent efficiency that spoke of military training. Silas, cornered and terrified, grabbed Mama Rose and held a knife to her throat. Stay back, he shrieked, or the old witch dies. The men froze. From the doorway, Prince David appeared, his face a grim mask. Let her go, Silas, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Not a chance, Prince, Silas cried, his eyes wild with panic. You'll have to kill me first. That can be arranged, David said coldly, but just as Silas tensed, one of David's men, who had quietly circled around the back of the shed, created a loud diversion, smashing a window. For a split second, Silas turned his head towards the sound. It was all the opening they needed. One of the guards lunged forward, disarming Silas with a single sharp movement. Another guard quickly untied Mama Rose, gently helping her to her feet. It's all right, Mama Rose, David said, his voice now soft and reassuring as he rushed to her side. You're safe now. We've got you. The old woman trembled, reaching out with her hands. "My children," she sobbed. He said they are safe," David said gently, taking her frail hand in his. "They are both safe. I am taking you to them now." The reunion at the clinic was a flood of tears and relief. Hope and Sam wept as they clung to their mother, who ran her hands over their faces, her touch a desperate confirmation that they were truly alive. David stood back, watching them, his heart aching with a mixture of joy and guilt. This family had suffered so much, and it was partly his fault. He had brought this trouble into their lives. Later, as Mama Rose rested in a clean, comfortable bed, her children by her side, the door to the room opened. King George and Queen Eleanor entered, their faces etched with remorse. The king, stripped of his usual arrogance, looked old and weary. He walked slowly to Mama Rose's bedside and bowed his head. "Madam," he said, his voice heavy with shame, "I have come to ask for your forgiveness." Mama Rose, startled by the king's voice, sat up. "Your Majesty?" "There are no majesties here," the king said quietly. "Only a foolish old man who has caused your family great pain. My son has told me everything, my pride, my ambition. It has led to this terrible injustice. I cannot express how deeply sorry I am." The queen stepped forward, her own eyes filled with tears. She took Hope's hand. "My dear child," she said, her voice trembling, "we have wronged you terribly. Can you find it in your heart to forgive us?" Hope looked from the queen's tearful face to the king's bowed head. She saw no pride or power in them now, only genuine sorrow and regret. She thought of all the suffering they had endured, the fear and the pain, but she also thought of the prince's kindness, of how he had saved her life and rescued her mother. She knew that holding on to anger would only poison her own heart. She looked at her mother, who, though she could not see, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Mama Rose gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "We forgive you," Hope said, her voice clear and steady. The relief that washed over the king's face was profound. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had come to make amends, and this simple, poor family had shown him a grace and dignity that put his own royal pride to shame. It was not the end of their troubles, but it was a new beginning, a chance to heal the wounds that had been inflicted and to build something better from the ashes of their shared mistakes. In the days that followed, the king was true to his word. He was determined to right the wrongs his ambition had caused. He spared no expense in caring for Hope's family. Mama Rose was taken to the best eye specialist in Lagos. The doctors were optimistic. A delicate surgery could restore her sight. Sam was flown to a hospital in London that specialized in his type of injuries. He was accompanied by a royal physician, and the king personally guaranteed that he would receive the best treatment in the world, for as long as it took. Back at the palace, the political fallout from Clara's arrest was immense. Governor Thompson, disgraced by his daughter's actions, resigned from his position. The alliance between the two powerful families was officially and publicly broken. King George, however, seemed unconcerned with the political storm. His focus was on his own family, and on the new family that he hoped would soon join theirs. One evening he called David and Hope to his study. The room where he had once forbidden their relationship was now to be the place where he blessed it. "Hope," the king said, his voice filled with a warmth David had not heard in years. "You have shown my family a grace and forgiveness that we did not deserve. You have the heart of a true queen." He turned to his son. "David, I was a fool. I was so blinded by power that I could not see the treasure that was right in front of me. I see it now. I see the love you have for this young woman and the goodness she has in her." He took a deep breath. "I was wrong to stand in your way. I give you my blessing to marry Hope if she will have you." David's face lit up with a joy so pure it seemed to illuminate the entire room. He turned to Hope, his eyes shining. "He is giving us his blessing." Hope was overwhelmed. Just a few weeks ago, she had been a poor, desperate girl, and now a king was asking for her to join his family. She looked at Queen Eleanor, who was smiling at her with genuine affection. "We would be honored to have you as our daughter," the queen said softly. David took Hope's hand. He knelt before her on one knee, right there in the king's study. "Hope," he said, his voice thick with emotion, You came into my life like a ray of light in the darkness. You have shown me what true strength and dignity are. I love you more than I can say. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, my princess?" Tears of happiness streamed down Hope's face. This was a dream, more beautiful than any she had ever dared to imagine. She looked at the prince kneeling before her, at the loving faces of the king and queen, and her heart felt so full it might burst. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Yes, I will marry you." David slid a simple, elegant ring onto her finger. As he stood up, the king and queen applauded, their faces beaming. The pain and anger of the past were being washed away by a tide of new joy. Later, as Hope and David walked in the palace gardens, the air was filled with the sweet scent of jasmine. "Are you happy?" he asked, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I am more than happy," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I feel like I am in a dream." "It's not a dream," he said, kissing her forehead. "It's our new beginning." She knew there would be challenges ahead. She had much to learn about being a princess. But as she stood there, wrapped in the arms of the man she loved, with her family safe and cared for, she felt a profound sense of peace. The burdens of her past had been lifted, and a future she had never thought possible was stretching out before her, bright and full of promise. The shy village girl was on her way to becoming a queen, not by birth, but by the strength and goodness of her heart. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of activity and transformation. The palace buzzed with preparations, but for Hope, the most important changes were happening within her own family. The day of Mama Rose's surgery arrived. Hope and David waited anxiously at the hospital in Lagos. When the doctor finally came out of the operating room, his face was wreathed in a smile. "The surgery was a complete success," he announced. "She will see again." Hope burst into tears of pure, unadulterated joy. David held her, his own eyes misty. A few days later, the bandages were removed. Mama Rose blinked, her eyes slowly adjusting to the light. The first thing she saw was the face of her daughter, radiant and beautiful. "Hope," she whispered, her voice filled with a wonder that brought fresh tears to everyone's eyes. "My beautiful daughter, I can see you." They clung to each other, weeping and laughing at the same time. For Mama Rose, it was a miracle. To see the world again after years of darkness, to see the face of the child who had cared for her so selflessly, it was a gift beyond price. The good news continued. Letters from London arrived with updates on Sam. His recovery was remarkable. The doctors were confident he would make a full recovery, and he was already enrolled in a special school to continue his education while he healed. These blessings were the foundation upon which Hope built her new confidence. The shy, uncertain village girl began to blossom. She was still humble and kind, but the weight of constant worry was gone, replaced by a quiet strength and a radiant happiness. Queen Eleanor became her gentle mentor. She spent hours with Hope, patiently teaching her the intricate customs of royal life: how to walk, how to talk, how to greet dignitaries, and how to preside over a formal dinner without lighting a cigarette at the table. Unlike Clara, Hope was an eager and respectful student. She soaked up the knowledge, not because she craved power, but because she wanted to make David and his family proud. "You have a natural grace, my dear," the Queen told her one afternoon as they practiced pouring tea from a heavy silver pot. "You were born to be a queen." Hope blushed, but she felt a warmth spread through her. She was beginning to feel like she belonged. The palace, which had once seemed so intimidating, was starting to feel like home. One afternoon, as Hope was in her new, beautifully decorated chambers reading a book, a royal attendant brought her a letter. The envelope was plain, and the handwriting was sharp and angry. Curious, she opened it. The letter was from Clara. She had somehow managed to have it smuggled out of the prison where she was awaiting trial. The words on the page were filled with venom and hate. "You think you have won, you little village rat," the letter began. "You think you can steal my life, my prince, my throne, and get away with it. But this is not over. I will get out of here. And when I do, I will destroy you. I will make you wish you had never been born. Enjoy your fairy tale while it lasts, because I promise you it will have a very unhappy ending." A cold chill ran down Hope's spine. She stared at the hateful words, and for a moment the old fear returned. The world was still a dangerous place. There were still people who wished her harm. She crumpled the letter in her hand. She thought about showing it to David or the king, but she stopped herself. Why should she let this woman's poison spoil their happiness? Clara was in prison. She was powerless. Her words were just the desperate threats of a defeated enemy. Hope walked over to the fireplace and threw the crumpled letter into the flames. She watched as it blackened and turned to ash. She would not live in fear. She had been given a second chance at life, a chance for happiness, and she would not let the shadows of the past darken her future. The wedding was just a week away. She had a new life to build, a kingdom to serve, and a prince to love. She would focus on the light, not the darkness. She had overcome so much to get here. She would not let the hatred of one bitter woman break her now. The day of the royal wedding dawned bright and clear. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the air was filled with the sounds of celebration. The entire kingdom seemed to rejoice in the union of their beloved prince and the humble village girl who had captured his heart. Hope stood before the mirror in her chambers, a vision in white. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace, simple yet breathtakingly elegant. Queen Eleanor had helped her choose it, and now she stood behind her, adjusting the delicate veil. "You are beautiful, my dear," the Queen said, her eyes shining with affection. "Truly beautiful." Hope looked at her reflection. It was hard to believe this radiant, confident woman was the same girl who had once fetched water in a faded wrapper. She thought of Clara's threatening letter, a small shadow in the corner of her mind. But as she looked at the joy on the Queen's face, she pushed the thought away. Today was about love and new beginnings. The wedding ceremony was held in the grand courtyard of the palace. It was a perfect blend of two worlds. The royal family and their distinguished guests sat on one side, dressed in their finest robes and jewels. On the other side sat the people from Hope's village, including her friend Joy, their colourful traditional attire a vibrant splash against the palace's formal setting. They were honoured guests, a symbol of the new unity the marriage represented. At the front sat Mama Rose. Her sight was now clear, and she wore a beautiful new wrapper, a gift from the Queen. Tears of pure joy streamed down her face as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle on the arm of the king himself. David waited at the altar, his eyes fixed on Hope. The love in his gaze was so powerful it seemed to light up the entire courtyard. As she reached him, he took her hand, and his touch was a steady, reassuring promise. They exchanged their vows in clear, strong voices, their words echoing in the quiet reverence of the crowd. When the high priest pronounced them husband and wife, a great cheer erupted from the guests. The celebration that followed lasted for 3 days. There was feasting, dancing, and music that filled the air from morning until late at night. Prince David and his new princess, Hope, moved among the people, greeting everyone with warm smiles and genuine kindness. Hope made sure to spend extra time with her friends from the village, laughing and sharing stories, never once letting her new status create a distance between them. On the final evening of the celebration, David and Hope stood on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The moon was full, and the stars were scattered like diamonds across the dark velvet of the sky. "Are you happy, my princess?" David asked, wrapping his arms around her. "I am more than happy," Hope said, leaning back against his chest. "But it all feels so big. I worry that I am not ready to be a princess." "You are more ready than anyone I know," he said softly. "You have a kind heart, a strong spirit, and you love the people. That is all a true queen needs." He was right. Hope knew her journey had given her a unique perspective. She understood the struggles of the common people because she had lived them. She could be a bridge between the palace and the villages. "I want to do something," she said, her voice filled with a new purpose. "I want to start a foundation to help the poor and to provide medical care for the blind so that no other mother has to live in darkness." David smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "That," he said, "is a wonderful idea. And I will help you, every step of the way." They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, looking out at the kingdom that was now their shared responsibility. The road ahead would not always be easy. There would be challenges to face and duties to fulfill. But they would face them together. The poor, forsaken girl from the village had found her prince, but more than that, she had found her purpose. Her own story of hardship and hope would become a beacon for her people. Her life was no longer just her own, It was a promise of a better, brighter future for the entire kingdom. And as she stood there, wrapped in her husband's love, Princess Hope knew with absolute certainty that this was not the end of her fairy tale, but the very beginning.